the world as well.
Yes, yeah. And we are at full house already. So I'll just mention the YouTube channel again. We are now live on YouTube. So if you get kicked out for some reason, please join us back on YouTube because I think the webinar, the Zoom bit will be full. But we are live, so I'm going to disappear. And Cindy, over to you.
Welcome, everyone. Lovely to see that we at full house, 107 of us on this webinar. And today is a very special webinar. Well, every month I say that. But today's special because we have a panel discussion with three very good-looking men, if you haven't noticed already. And of course, a moderator, quite beautiful, stunning. And I am going to, in a minute, hand over to our moderator, Rama, who is going to introduce the panelist and herself to you. And the topic for today's webinar is authentic leadership. Or, yeah, that's what it is, right, Rama? Yeah, authentic. I think you say it better. Sorry.
No, you got it right.
Okay, good. Welcome to our panelists, and we're really looking forward to engaging with you for the next hour or so. And to all our participants, please use the chat box and engage as much as you want to with asking your questions or sharing your own wisdom. Because I like it when we all get together and create this collective wisdom space where we all learn from. Also to let you know that, as you are typing in questions or a discussion point you want the panelists to pick up on, we're going to hold that. I will make a note of it and hold it right until the last 20 minutes or so, because while in discussion, the panelists will continue being in discussion, and thereafter they will, they've set aside enough time for Q&A. And without me saying much, Rama, please can I ask that you remind me at the end to give out the password? And I'd love to hand over to you. I'd like to hand over to you, Rama. So it's over to you.
Thank you, Cindy. And hi, everybody from around the world. My name is Rama Kannan. And I'm a master certified coach, mentored by Cindy and Ram, and have about probably 2,800 hours of coaching, and been a coach and a mentor for 10 years and have about 16, 17 years experience before that in the corporate career in strategy and marketing. Before I saw the light, let's say, to move into coaching and mentoring, which is what I thoroughly enjoy. I'm really excited about today's topic. It's very close to my heart of being an authentic leader in the workplace, both in my 16 plus years of work experience and as a senior leader, and of being a coach for the last 10 years. I've seen the struggles of leaders to be authentic. Sometimes leaders even question the need for authenticity. In this VUCA world, especially in the current situation of COVID-19, with everything in the environment changing all the time, the leaders need to be able to build teams that not only trust them, but also trust each other. Being authentic is what builds that trust. However, leaders, we've seen, struggle being authentic because they perceive challenges of being vulnerable, and the need to make choices that have a larger organizational goal, perhaps, but which might not necessarily be equitable to all people. With that, the reason why we have the panel discussion today is we thought it would be very important to bring people who are leaders, who are leading teams globally. And so I'm very privileged to have three people with phenomenal experience in the panel who have faced that quandary that we're talking about many times, leading teams. And they've been leading teams for decades. And I'm really thankful that they are here with us, sharing their experience and their learnings. Let me start with the three of them. There are Ramakrishnan, there is Mahesh Balani, and there is Ramesh Sreedharan, as you can see on your screen. Let me start with Ram. Ram has been in the banking and financial services industry for over 30 years, in leading local and international banks across India, Australia, and Taiwan. He now heads commercial banking operations for JP Morgan Chase for the Global Corporate Center for India and the Philippines. He talked about it, tens of thousands of people in his larger team. Mahesh, our second panelist, has over 2 decades of experience, again in BFSI, healthcare, manufacturing services. They include GE Capital, Apollo Health Street, Seagate Technologies. He works now in venture capital and business acceleration for startups. He works with founders and CEOs and engages with them in their leadership journey. Ramesh is our final panelist, who probably many of you know. He's a master certified coach as well, was in my cohort and a good friend. He has over 30 years of experience with significant business and team leadership experience. As a coach, Ramesh has worked with 300 plus leaders, both in their coaching individually and with their teams. He also runs various leadership programs through his organization, Orenda Center for Leadership Excellence, with his lovely wife, Priya. I missed adding something that both Ram and Mahesh are also in their coaching journeys. Mahesh is already an ACC and on the way to becoming a PCC, is already under training. And Ram, again, also is on the coaching journey. And we will talk about it during the panel discussion, how the coaching has influenced their leadership styles. With that, let me begin by asking the panelists, what does authentic leader mean for them? And what are the characteristics that showcase it? Mahesh, why don't I start with you? Love to hear, an example, how it has impacted you. What does authentic leader mean for you? What are characteristics that you think are important?
Sure. Rama, Ramesh, before you can answer, may I invite the attendees, while our panelists are discussing what does authentic leadership mean for them, may I invite you into the chat box to also type in, what does authentic leadership mean for you?
Thanks.
Sorry, Rama.
No, thank you. I meant to say that. Thank you for adding in. Yes, absolutely. Okay. Yes, Mahesh.
Okay, so first of all, thank you for asking me to be a part of this panel. I'm not sure if I'm probably the best suited to speak on competencies. I'm still a learner, even though I'm ACC certified. But I really feel honored and privileged because I think many of the participants are probably coaches and colleagues that I've worked with and grown together with. So it really feels privileged to be a part of this panel. So thanks a lot for asking me to speak today. So I have, again, from a very personal experience, I look at authenticity sort of in 2 dimensions or 2 aspects to authenticity, or what it means to be an authentic leader. I think the first one, the way I see it is, are you authentic with yourself? I think that's the first question we all need to ask ourselves. Are we accepting of our own imperfections? Are we comfortable with the fact that we may not know everything? Are we okay to acknowledge that in public, that we may not have the answer, and that's absolutely fine. I think just being true to yourself and realizing that, I myself don't have everything that I need in order to be successful or carry on in life. That to me is the first sort of aspect of being authentic. And the other, I look at it from a point of view of how do we interact with others or how do we engage with others. It's in our behavior, it's in the way we speak. And it's about being kind to others. It's about being fair, being transparent. It's about, you're always in situations where one cannot share a lot of confidential information, for example. And I've been in corporate for many, many years working with businesses. There are times when one is not able to share everything, but as long as you let people know what the logic or what the rationale is behind a decision like that, then I think that's an aspect of being authentic. And I'll just share, one example, at least the way I have used it for myself, which is that, as leaders and as managers, we often have to deal with, growing our teams in meeting their expectations or meeting their aspirations from a career perspective. Especially in large teams, you have so many people that you work with, and you have to deal with, all of their aspirations. So, and all of them want to grow, right? But there's only so many promotions that you can do. How do you, in those situations, still be authentic, knowing very well that if you had 5 people in your team, there's only one person who can actually get promoted or who can get that next role. And setting that expectation with every individual in that group, that look, getting promoted or not getting promoted is really an outcome. But still letting them know that they are an extremely valuable part of that team. And it's really that the team is delivering to the, either the customer expectation or the management's expectation. But it's not always possible for everyone to grow, or even setting an expectation saying, hey, look, it's going to take you 2 years in order to grow. I think, at least in my experience, what I've seen is that a lot of my team members have felt extremely comfortable knowing how long or whether or not they're going to get promoted or not. So all I'm saying is that A, accept the fact that you may not have it all within you. And B, you may also find that same kind of imperfections or incompleteness in others. But how do you kindly let them know and help them along that journey? I think to me, that is being authentic.
That's great. I mean, so you're saying being first authentic to yourself. And I heard you also say being open and direct with others and being kind along with that.
Right.
What you would call being authentic for you.
Right.
Okay, we'll come back to maybe some examples of where you have, you also talked about imperfections within you or in somebody else. How do you share that? So maybe we can come back to that to talk about that part of it, because that's not easy for a leader perhaps to share. So it'll be great to know that. Ram, what about you? What do you think authenticity in leadership is all about?
Thanks, Rama. Again, similar to what Mahesh said, thanks for inviting me to be a panelist. I'm deeply honored. It's a privilege. My thoughts on authentic leadership. So I'm going to take a slightly historical perspective to this to say that authenticity to leadership is not something new. It has existed since ages. I mean, there are slokas in the Mahabharata which talk about manasa vacha karmana, which actually means that whatever you do, it has to start from the mind, and then that translates into the word, and then that translates into deeds or actions. And similar examples of this can be found, in Tibetan Buddhism, in Zoroastrianism, etc., where there is a very clear connection between what the mind thinks, conjures up, how that is translated into spoken word, and how that is then translated into action. So how is that important is the question. So authenticity is basically being true to oneself, or being transparent, or being naked, as it were. So the question, especially in these times, is to ask is, does authenticity mean not wearing a mask? And I mean that metaphorically and not necessarily literally in this context. Yes, authenticity actually means not having ever to wear a mask, not to yourself, not to your family, not to your friends, not to the in office or interactions that you do. So because there is not a need to. So authenticity comes directly from the heart, right? So you are what you are, and you allow others see you the way you are. So you live to a particular set of values. You've been brought up with a certain value system, you have ethics, you have business principles, you have guidelines, you have the environment, and all of this is VUCA, subject to VUCA, right? So we're changing. So an authentic leader, I would say, is a person who manages to retain this transparency throughout her or his journey towards being a leader of people, right? So, and that talks about what Mahesh just alluded to. So it's a variety of things that it's like a complex recipe. There's not just one answer to it. So it talks about, your value system, your ethics. So how do you show compassion? How do you bring trust? How do you exhibit trust? How do you coach people? How do you guide them? How do you mentor them? How do you build effective and efficient teams? How do you make them reliable? How do you make them self-sufficient? So what are the complex set of variables that are required to make this person be authentic? And I would say that there are some basic ingredients and there are some others which could change depending on the situation or depending on the nature of things. So it could be trust, ethics, aligning values, having real conversations with people, being approachable, being compassionate, being kind, at the same time being firm about results, right? So I'd say it's an algorithm and it's an equation. It does not necessarily mean that one size would fit all, though there are certain broad guidelines and principles that we would like to follow.
See, you drew from various religions, epics to talk about what it may mean, and about how it would need to be compassionate, to be kind yet candid, firm when needed, and so on. So we can come back to. I'd love to hear examples of when you feel clearly are saying you're authentic all the time. It needs to be, but when it has been perceived to be authentic as well, and how has that shown in the workplace? I'll come back to it. Maybe first hear from Ramesh as to what his take is on being an authentic leader.
Thanks, Rama. So, I want to sort of step back a bit, Rama, and you talked about the VUCA world, right? And probably drawn some history like Ram did. So VUCA was a term which was coined by the army. Actually the American army, and it talks about the state of war, right? And in state of war, when you visualize war, you're talking about a lot of smoke. Nothing is clear. The intent that you go in with is not what happens. So in the current scenario, in a way, from a topic standpoint, is so critical because today I think that's what leaders face. There is absolutely no way somebody can state a three-year strategy and execute on it and make sure it happens. It may happen, but probably the way to get there is going to be just like what happens in a war. You find your own way to get there. And to do that, you have to make sure people trust you. And that's the fundamental need for authenticity. And to my mind, authenticity comes from three parts, and one of which Mahesh talked about, which is your own personal vulnerability, the readiness to accept you as who you are, and let people appreciate the fact that you need not be seen as a strong person who knows everything all the time. That's probably the first fundamental part of it. The second part of it, and which I think can become a big challenge, is what you mentioned, Rama, value-based choices. So value-based choices is about the ability for a leader to figure out what is the right thing to do for everybody at any point of time. And especially in a VUCA world where choices keep changing all the time, readiness to let go of those choices sometimes, accept that the choice that you made sometimes is wrong. So which means vulnerability comes in very importantly at that point in time. And take a new path if necessary, and make sure people trust you and come along with you, and you're able to get that, get people to engage with you in that standpoint. And that brings me to the third piece, which is the engagement part. Engagement, in my mind, I think the easiest ways to define how to engage constructively is emotional intelligence. It's a big term, but probably the easiest way to define a constructive way of engaging. So that's to me what authenticity is these three pillars, sort of.
So 3 pillars of vulnerability, of value-based choices working,
Yes.
and of being emotional intelligence, which is about both inter and self knowledge in terms of how you deal with. Ramesh, do you want to talk about maybe an example of taking on how, as when you were leading a team, is there some place where you felt that it was so clear that you were, to everybody, that you were being so authentic as a leader? Did you get anything from any of your teams?
So unfortunately, Rama, nobody tells you you're being authentic or not, right? So it's something which, for example, right now, in this group, if all of us didn't trust each other, we wouldn't be saying what we have to say, right? So authenticity is something that you sense, and I think people around you sense it very, very, very quickly. So I was talking to a friend of mine today afternoon about a webinar that I was part of 3 days back, where it was so easy to be authentic because it was a group of about 15 odd people. But for some reason, the group created a sense of trust. Most of us didn't know each other, but they created a sense of trust. So it was very easy to be authentic. Going back to examples of what it was when working, I guess it's about being able to take tough decisions and people actually realizing and agreeing that it is the right thing to do. They may not agree, they may get upset at that point in time, but in the long term, they still stick with you. They still appreciate what you're doing. I don't know. I'll probably leave it to Ram and Mahesh. What are the other indications? But it's not an easy question to answer. So it's very difficult to give an example of an act of authenticity. So let me put it this way. Probably the most difficult act of authenticity is firing somebody. How do you really do it without, because it's the right thing to do for that person and for the organization, right? How do you make sure the person understands that and it doesn't, it doesn't become a nasty situation, for example? And I think the best test of authenticity is at that point in time. If you can get an exit conversation done without the person, ending up going and filing for example, a harassment case or disagreeing with what you do and then going and talking to HR about it and things like that, is probably the best example.
Yeah. And so they trusted you for doing what is best for the organization and for themselves. That's what I'm hearing. That's great. Mahesh, let me turn to you. You talked about, you started talking about the perhaps the vulnerability which Ramesh picked up. Is there a place you can maybe give an example of when you were vulnerable, when your team could see that, and how that made an impact in your team? Is Mahesh frozen?
I think so. Oh, no, he's back.
Okay. Yeah. Mahesh, did you hear what I was asking?
No, I'm sorry. I got momentarily disconnected.
I'm just saying you were the one.
But I did hear what Ramesh said, so I can.
No, you were talking about the vulnerability part, right? Maybe the when you first talked about being authentic. I'd love to know if there are examples of when you felt you were vulnerable, that you felt you were, perhaps you didn't have it all and could share it with your team. What was that like? And what was, maybe, is there an example that you could actually share with us today? Okay, today it seems like the time Mahesh is not able to.
So I can actually share an example, and it's a very stark example. Okay, so that while Mahesh comes back.
Yeah.
So it so happened that I got hired into one of my earlier organizations as a Master Black Belt, which is Master Black Belt is somebody who's supposed to know something about Six Sigma, and I didn't know how to spell it. And I had 13 people working for me. The interesting part is, and almost most of that group actually were people who were just starting off and needed to get trained and certified and all that. So I actually went and told them, I said, guys, I don't know anything about Six Sigma. What do you suggest? So they actually rallied together and said, let us learn together. And we created a forum which met once a week for about 3 hours, where we either shared content and spoke about it, or a problem which everybody's tried to get together and solve. The interesting, I still remember the name of that forum. It was ETM. It is therefore I am. Okay, it is what it is. So it's a very stark example for me.
So being actually sharing with your team what you didn't know and getting them to. So Mahesh, you are the Six Sigma. You have that. And Ramesh was just sharing that he didn't know anything about it and shared that with his team. Is there anything that about vulnerability that you shared with your team that you didn't know, or what was that like? And how did that sense of trust or authenticity?
Sure. I think Ramesh is being modest. He knows enough about Six Sigma. He's done. I mean, I and Ramesh and I have been colleagues in GE together. We've been part of a very fast-growing organization. And one thing that Ramesh said rings so true, and that was sort of an example I also wanted to quickly touch upon. Is the toughest thing is for a leader is to actually let people go, and to be able to do it in a way that is both respectful as well as seen as for the benefit of that individual, I think is one of the most difficult things that a leader will ever do. And I can, I think we both grew up in at least from a corporate point of view, in an environment where every year we had to let go of 10 to 20% of our staff. And it was a tough, position to be in. And I particularly remember this one individual, I won't take the name. It was very early in my operations career. And, in a couple of months, I realized that this person is really not cutting it, right? And even without being asked to actually let this person go, I actually had a conversation with this person and said, look, it's very clear that, you're not finding your feet. You're struggling with a lot of the client deliverables. You don't seem to be enjoying a lot of the, interactions with the client, with the employees, etc. This person was actually a finance expert. He came from, outside of Genpact at that point in time. And, the BPO environment was very different. Not everyone could really make it. And it was very clear that this person was not very comfortable. At a time when I didn't really have to let this person go, one of the tough decisions I still remember that conversation, it was almost 12 years ago, was that I actually sat him down and asked him, what does he think of his own performance? And if you are genuine in your tone, if you show the concern, I refer to being kind. If you're able to communicate that emotion of being kind, of being there for this person, then the person really opens up. And when they open up, you are able to actually guide them through that decision. So obviously at that point, I was not remotely close to being a coach. I didn't know what really coaching was, but as I relate that conversation to what I do now, it was all about providing the space to this individual, allowing this person to reflect, to think, and at the end of that conversation, it was actually a joint decision. And I keep reminding myself of that conversation only because 2 years later, I receive an email from this person, and he tells me that you letting me go on that day was probably the best thing to happen to my career, because he ended up becoming the financial controller of the Taj Group of hotels. Okay. Now, for a person who was like a manager in a back office environment, struggling to becoming the financial controller for a large hotel group, and 2 years later, when I saw that message from him, it just, I can't even express the emotion, but the joy I felt for that individual, and the fact that I was really a small part of that journey for him, was great for me. So all I'm saying is that, as leaders, bring emotion to the conversation, bring yourself to that conversation, and then be fearless about what you're going to share, what you're going to tell them, feedback, etc. If you do it genuinely, if you put yourself in their shoes, to use that word, I think those conversations go extremely well. So this is just an example that I could think of from my career.
Wonderful examples, huh, Ramesh? About your sharing that. I would love to also hear from the other attendees, participants here, but what does vulnerability mean for them? How does that translate into creating trust or being authentic as a leader? Would love to hear that. And Mahesh, that was, one of I've talked about it n number of times, Carl Rogers' books on becoming a person, on being utmost positive regard for your client, is what defined my MCC journey for me. And that's what you're talking about here, right? For having that regard for the person, having that emotion for the person, and putting yourself there so that they know that there is compassion, there is that space given to them, and so they can actually be genuine and grow in that, thrive in that space. That's fantastic to hear. Ram, I'm going to flip it a little with you. I want to know if there was ever you felt, maybe yourself or somebody else, that was maybe not authentic. And is there anything like that you would like to, or would love to know? How do people see that?
I'm trying to think back to, there's possibly one incident that comes to mind. Many years ago, I used to be working for a particular bank, and that bank got, the assets of that bank got sold to another one. And in that process, everybody had to apply for their own roles, right? So because you had two of everything, because both the banks were merging.
Right.
In that process, it created a lot of upheaval within the organization, where it was pretty much cutthroat competition for who will stay and who will go, right? So during that process, I remember going through a lot of mixed emotions, because I was at the receiving end for a lot of emotions from the leaders in the organization, who were dishing out a lot of the party lines to say that, this is changes for the better, and it's in everyone's interest, etc., etc. And I was torn between that and translating that message that we heard onto my team, because it sounded very false. It didn't sound that was being genuine. So my dilemma was between, how am I supposed to carry this wishy-washy party line where things had already been pretty much decided, and how am I going to translate that to my team, who are wanting to know the truth? And so how do I bridge that gap? And so I thought about it over the weekend. This happened on a Friday. I thought about it over the weekend, saying, should I just translate that party line back onto everybody on Monday morning and saying, hey guys, this is the message I've got, so deal with it? Or should I think differently? So it was a fairly difficult weekend that I spent, but then ultimately I thought about it and I said, look, I don't think I'll be doing anybody any favors by just giving them, passing down the party line to them. So we had a team meeting on Monday morning and I told people the news as it was and saying, this is what I've been told, but here's the real situation. This is what we need to do. So, you know, and then I sat down, I had a team meeting and then I sat down with each member of my team thereafter. And then we worked out forward-looking plans of saying, okay, here's how I see things are going to change. Here's the landscape's going to change. You know, do you have your resume ready? You'll have to brush it up. And this is how. So we sat down and went through interview techniques, and we sat down and spoke about how do we empower each person to actually, because everybody was so cocooned and nobody had expected that the bank would get sold. And so it was like people being like the roof getting torn off from your house and suddenly you're out in the open and you had no context, you didn't expect it coming, and all this happened like in a matter of hours, if not days. Yeah, and so news, of course, you know, went back to the top management saying that, hey, there's a different set of energy coming from this particular team, and so I had to handle that as well. And I stood up and I said, look, you know, I didn't believe that I needed to be inauthentic or to spread a false message amongst my people, because I think I owe them the truth, and I worked with them for a few years now, and I think that I owe that to them. It turned out ultimately that at the end of the next 2 or 3 months, everybody in that team actually did manage to find a great position, either within or outside the organization, and it turned out well. But for me, the dilemma was getting torn between, should I just toe the party line and carry on regardless, or should I then flip it and be authentic? And I'm glad I took that decision then.
I can imagine that your team really respects you for that and will always probably quote you for having done that. You know, I saw a couple of questions which are coming in the chat box, which a couple of them were really interesting. One on, you know, how do you create the perception of being authentic, not just being authentic? The second, I think somewhere else, was about how do you be pragmatic and diplomatic? How do you reconcile that with being authentic? Do Ramesh, Mahesh, do any of you want to take that up?
So, I'll take the first one, Rama, if that is okay for the group. You know, how do you become authentic? I don't think. So personally, I don't think it's a question that, or it's a skill. It's not a skill, right? So it's not something which you can just learn and do. I think it's about being self-aware of who you are and what you feel at any point of time. How do you respond to situations? I think the points that each panelist was making, you know, can you? Actually, I'm just watching. I'm seeing Gangapriya type here. Vulnerability is about accepting that you can fail, make mistakes. So it's about your own, you know, your own readiness to accept yourself is probably the first part. So self-awareness probably step one to becoming authentic. Two is, and I probably, you know, here I, you know, like to actually quote one of my ex-bosses, a gentleman called VK Raman. You know, some tough times you know, I worked with him for some very tough times, and one thing he told me is, you know, Ramesh, just make sure you have your CV ready in your pocket. And that helps. So whatever happens, you know, I'm ready. It doesn't matter whatever happens, right? And I think it takes, so the second part of it is actually being ready to take that risk in whatever way it comes. Make sure you stand by, you know, doing what is right. And sometimes it is tough. It can be really nasty sometimes, right? And there's another question in the chat box there by, I think, sorry, in the question Q&A by, yeah, Amit, who says, what do you do when you when you find authenticity missing at the topmost leadership in the organization? It's a tough question, and I don't really have an answer for that. I don't know. I'll leave it to the rest of the panelists.
Maybe Ramesh, keep the CV ready, right? Ready to walk out.
I thought so. That's what triggered me to look at that question. But yeah, I would love to hear from the others as to what they think.
Yeah.
I just have one point on that perception point or question, Rama, that you asked. I don't know really if it's about creating a perception, because if you're authentic, it shows. It reflects in the way you talk. It reflects in your personality. People see it. I don't think we need to really worry about how do I create the perception of being authentic. Just be authentic. Just be yourself. And it's all about. I forget who said this, but I read a quote a few days ago, and as we were sort of talking about this particular topic, is that just be yourself, because everyone else is taken, right? You don't have to be like someone else, and I have seen that true to in every situation. I mean, I'll speak of myself as a coach, and Ramesh will probably understand what I'm saying. I tend to have a slightly different style in some of our conversations, right? When it comes to coaching. And I've always felt that, this is me. This is what I bring to the conversation. I may not be like another coach. I may not ask questions that may possibly bring about, a spiritual transformation in an individual. I don't know. Maybe it does, maybe it doesn't. But I'm okay with the way I am. I mean, I am okay with the fact that at the end of that conversation, the client of mine took away something of value from that conversation. So all I'm saying is just be yourself, because everyone else is really taken. This is not my quotation, this is someone else's, and I'll think of who said it actually. But you just have to be yourself. That's it.
Right. And does any of the panelists have, Ram, perhaps you? There was a question on how does diplomacy and pragmatic, being that, go side by side with authentic leader?
So to my mind, I'd say one does not need to be bereft of the other. Being pragmatic is certainly finding a practical solution to the problem at hand. Certainly, being pragmatic does not necessarily being direct or being blunt. Being diplomatic is just couching whatever one needs to say in a manner that makes it more palatable. That does not mean that one needs to mollycoddle individuals at all. It is what it is. And if you are the way you are, and people know you the way you are, and if you are true to yourself, then people know when you're being diplomatic and people know when you're being pragmatic, and there is no second guessing you on that front, because when hard truths have to be told, they will be told. And, perhaps in a diplomatic manner, which probably helps to soften the blow, but there is no dichotomy in the two.
That's amazing. I mean, I remember in my coaching journey, Cindy always mentions, if you have to ask a direct question, land it softly. If there is direct communication to be had, when you have to mention to anyone which you're hearing from them, and be authentic with them, right? And be open with them as to it's a conversation that you're having with a friend. Keep it that way and always land it softly. And that's what you're saying, that you can, be authentic and land it softly.
Absolutely.
We talked about going around with being authentic, and everywhere I can hear the coaching competencies. I'm sure Cindy is also like, oh my God, this is what coaching competency is. You can hear that. And I'd love to hear from, all three of you. Ramesh, of course, is a MCC, and Mahesh is soon to be PCC, I'm sure. And so is Ram, in that journey and getting the certification. So when I was thinking about while you're talking about the coaching competencies are just out there, right? The CC3 talks it straight away as establishing trust and intimacy, which is what we have been talking about now, about how being authentic is what is needed to be creating trust, and being trustworthy and creating that trust is what is going to make you a great leader. Or if you move into CC4 about coaching presence, again, that talks of being observant, empathetic, and responsive, and perhaps being curious to learn more and not being judgmental, or just being open with your coachee or your any team member. Or move into CC5, it will be about active listening, that you are hearing the client holistically. You are paying attention to both the verbal and the non-verbal, and both to the said and the unsaid. And we just talked about direct communication as well, how to be clear and, and share with them and providing feedback. How do you think this journey for you has perhaps impacted being a leader? Mahesh, why don't I go with you?
See, I think for me personally, coaching came at a time when I was kind of going through a little bit of a rocky patch in my corporate career. And maybe I can share one example of how it affected me personally. And as I look back to that time, I felt that and there was a phase when things were not really falling in place, and I'm sure all of us have been through that at some point in our careers, right? And to me, it came rather late. So you sort of build up your ego, you build up your whatever it is that corporate life does to you, and at some point that bubble is pricked, that ego is pricked, and to be able to understand what that moment is critical, because at that point I think was probably one of the few times I felt that there was something that I couldn't do. That phase was tough. It wasn't easy for me. I since then left that life and moved on to something else. And coaching came along, and I think one of the things it did to me was to be able to self-introspect. So for me, the coaching journey has been extremely beneficial, more for looking within, looking at what I am, and I spoke about imperfections at the beginning of this conversation. What are those imperfections within me? And knowing those and be able to be okay with it, comfortable with it, and even be vulnerable about it, I think brought about a significant shift in the way I grew as a leader. Since then, I've had a number of similar situations in my consulting work, in my corporate work since then, where I've had the chance to be in similar situations, and being aware of what I can and cannot do has really helped me in that journey. So just speaking from that perspective, the coaching journey has brought out those additional competencies as a leader, I think.
Right. And so that's impacted the way you interact with the people that you're working with. That's great to hear. Ram, what would you say the coaching journey and the coaching competencies, how has that perhaps impacted, as you lead large teams now?
When I started the journey, I really didn't know what to expect. But as we got introduced into the process, one began to appreciate how beautifully the entire coaching process is organized, that it kind of gets you to follow a very structured, methodical kind of routine, which allows you to get to the cut to the chase really, really quickly. And it allows you, and I was sharing with Ramesh earlier as well, to say, today, there is a lot more awareness about many things that go on during a conversation that I would not perhaps have noticed earlier. They would have been there, but it just didn't draw my attention. But now, when you're having a conversation with somebody, you're also conscious of the tone, the texture of the conversation, the choice of words, the tonality, and how it is said, how the person responds, how the person has chosen to articulate a sentiment, and therefore the emotion that goes behind that. And then the other thing that we also learned was how not to use the word why. And then initially I did find it quite intriguing and difficult, because it's so natural to ask why, because you just get with it really quickly, and then you had to find out interesting ways of how not to use why in a sentence, and how to invite an open-ended questions, so that you're not really boxing people into forcing an answer out of them one way or another with a yes and a no. For me, it was a revelation, right? It was more an opening out of avenues that it allowed you to explore a few different dimensions of how a conversation can be had, whether it's a difficult conversation or not, and how it can be more meaningful to the recipient, and how you can extract more from it by just structuring the conversation in a format that kind of, it's like you get more juice out of the same orange. I don't know if that's an absurd metaphor to use, but that's basically what it is. I'm just going to respond to one question which I see here, which is, what would be the daily question a leader should ask him or herself to make sure that they are authentic? And it just reminded me of many years ago, we used to have in the bank that I used to work for, there is the general manager of operations had this big poster behind his chair, which just asked the question to say, what have you done to earn your keep for today, right? Meaning, have you earned your salary for today? What have you done? Which actually made you stop and think to say, what have I done to add value either to myself or to the firm or to the organization? What difference have I made either to myself or the people that I interact with? Which is it's quite an existential question to ask oneself, but that would be my question to make sure that you're authentic. So, how have you impacted somebody else's life today, or what positive impact have you made to the environment around you in whatever small way that you can, and that would be my question.
I also want to answer that. That question really stood out. And Anushli, I don't know if I pronounced the name right.
Anushli Sidambaram. Yes.
Yeah. Actually, to me, the question probably is, can I sleep well today? It's not easy to sleep if something is bothering you, and I think that's probably the biggest question that I would ask myself. So, interesting question.
Yeah. How have you earned your keep today, and are you able to? How well can you sleep today? Yeah. Mahesh, do you have a question that you would ask yourself?
I was hoping you wouldn't ask me that question, but
I'm going to ask.
I think
now.
yeah. So I can't think of one question, but I think what I like about being a coach and also being a leader and imbibing some of that coaching style in me is if I can somehow share that knowledge with people around me, because I have seen the benefit of having and Ram referred to not asking why and other ways of asking the same question, right? If only more and more business leaders, corporate leaders, and professionals in organizations, if only they knew how to ask these questions differently. There's so much more that one can get out of our teams, out of people we work with, by just asking powerful questions. And I think that's the one competency that to me really stands out, because that's what really a coach is doing, right? They're asking questions, and to be able to ask good, powerful questions to get the other person to start thinking is probably the one thing I would ask myself as a coach on a daily basis. Hey, what am I, or how am I asking that same question differently? And is there a way I can share that same experience with other people so that they ask better questions?
So you're really talking about empowering people to sort of think on their own, right?
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
In a way, that also
because then your work is done, right? I mean, as a leader, if you have your team work for you, and if you have, let's say, 20 people in your team, it's really 20x of what you can achieve as an individual. So which very few leaders actually understand and use in their style.
Mahesh, I have a contrarian view to that, if I may. I never take the assumption that my team works for me. It's the other way around. I work for my team. I work to empower my team. I work to do whatever makes them successful. I never give them the impression that they are either subservient to me or they report to me. I maybe on a organogram they might, but that's not the intent. Like, so I'm here to help you succeed. I'm here to help you win, right? So make use of my gray hair experience, expertise to help you get whatever you want to get, right? So that's pretty much the way I've always seen it.
Yeah, as Nayan Kumar says, that's the servant.
That's a great point. Yeah, that's a great point.
And in some way, I got it that, Mahesh, you were talking the same, but in different words, just putting it across. Yeah. So, I mean, clearly, I mean, having the coaching mindset makes for people to be authentic leaders who their team gets to trust, is what I'm hearing. And that's what seems to come through with all that. I'm going to go to
I'm going to slightly add to that, Rama, with your permission.
Yes.
So coaching mindset with clarity of thought on what's the right thing to do.
Is that easy, Ramesh? Clarity of thought on what is the right thing to do.
Yeah, that's where the conscience comes in. Yeah, that's the way I would look at it. That's what I wanted to add to that.
Right. I mean, we've been looking at questions as well along the way, and I'm conscious of time. There was some other question on, is there in the question box, there was about, is there a different kinds of authentic behavior for, I think, high level, does the definition of authentic leadership change at middle management and at senior management? Do you think it does?
I don't think it does. And interestingly, there was also a question that, if I remember, it was Nayan who asked, so it is related to in my mind. I'm just scrolling up. How is an authentic leader transform culture of an organization? Right?
Correct.
I think they're sort of interrelated. I think it's the being of a group of people. So, and if the leadership is authentic, there is, in my personal experiences, and I think that was the example which Ram gave and what Mahesh also was talking about. Ram's example of his team when the merger was happening, or the sale was happening, how it worked differently. There's a ripple effect.
Right.
And I think leadership affects everybody around them, and that ripple effect, again, I don't think there's science behind it, but it is just the being of the group which is reflected by what the leader is.
Now I hear everybody talking about how it's a sense, the authenticity is, it's not easy to maybe put in words. But people who are actually growing into being leaders and in that ladder, are there any tools, any tips that any of you may have which will help them in that path? I know, Ramesh, you talked about the 3 pillars of emotional intelligence which can be developed, and being open and vulnerable and show your imperfections, as Mahesh mentioned as well, and as Ram mentioned about the value-based choices that you're making. But are there any, any tips, any books, any tools which may help people? And again, I mean, this is an open invitation to all the attendees as well. If there are tips that you have used, if there are things that you've learned from a leader, would love to hear for all of us to learn. Just put it in the chat. It would be great.
Rama, if I may take 1 minute, please, while everybody's typing your question on tools, tips, books, whatever. To all the attendees, I have typed the password into the chat. And in case you didn't see that, the password for today's webinar is orange, you glad. Orange as in the fruit or the color orange. Orange, you glad. And I did come up with that. I got to be quite authentic. That's Magda's creativity. Orange, you glad.
Remember it.
There we go.
Back to us.
Go ahead, Rama.
Yeah. In the chat box for anybody who needs to see it. Yeah.
And attendees, we'll take about 5 more minutes to round up on this. If you're okay with that.
Yes.
Go ahead, Rama.
Yeah, just would love to hear from, Ram, do you want to start off? Are there any tools and tips that you want to share with the people? And again, anybody who wants to put it in the attendees, participants, please go ahead and type.
I just happened to read recently something which Bill George had written about the VUCA world. So we all know VUCA as being the acronym for volatility, uncertainty, complexity, and ambiguity. So Bill George, and you can, if y'all haven't heard of him, y'all can look him up. There are lots of TED Talks and YouTube videos on Bill George. So his VUCA 2.0 to address the VUCA 1.0 is actually vision, understanding, courage, and adaptability. And I found that quite interesting to see that, here's something which leaders of today can use to kind of help to offset the VUCA isms of today's world.
That's fascinating. Ramesh, do you have anything that you think can help?
So I'm not a tools person, Rama. So I don't believe in tools and ticking off things. But having said that, one component of what we spoke out, which is emotional intelligence, is competency based. And I think you can develop those competencies. And that's probably the first step towards it. The other pieces around, your conscience and things like that, you just have to build it through self-awareness. To feel for yourself as to what's happening with you. Now, are you comfortable with yourself? Questions of that kind probably are what I would ask. If you're not comfortable with yourself, there is something wrong in the way of, or the way you are or what you're doing.
Wow. Okay. To be comfortable with yourself. And I think Mahesh mentioned that as well, right? Being truthful with yourself. Mahesh, are those the ones that you would have as well? Or is there anything that you would like to?
I don't have a tip or a tool, but I think what I feel as leaders or managers or professionals, really, we all can benefit from is to look within. And, different people have different ways of doing it. Some pray, some meditate. I personally do a little bit of meditation, not a whole lot, but what I see also helps is, just spending time with yourself. And if you are able to take, 15 minutes out of a day and be able to just be with yourself and look within and start to reflect on what you are as an individual, I think the rest of the day, the interactions throughout the day, and for you to be authentic or whatever else you need to be as a leader, it just comes out very naturally. So you don't have to necessarily, be cast in a mold. You don't have to necessarily be like another leader. Have your own style, have your own, do what works best for you. But what I have seen benefit me is if I'm able to spend time with myself with my thoughts, look within. I think it has helped me a lot. So I would just share that as a tip for
everyone. Yeah. That reflection time. Somebody
Absolutely.
Me time. Yeah. Cindy, do you want to add something to it? Is there something that
yeah, I'm what I want to say, Rama, I love the way the panel and you interacted today. I felt like I was in engagement and in conversation with each one of you as you spoke. So, talking about trust and authentic, it showed up and in a lovely way. And the thing I want to say is, as you and the panelists go into any kind of closing thoughts, I wanted to say to the attendees, thank you all for attending. Please, if there's anything you're taking away from the session or you want to comment on the session, do so in the chat box. Our panelists would love to hear from you. Absolutely. And join us next month when our webinar, when we have live coaching from yeah, that's all I want to say. The rest is a surprise. So we have some live coaching next month, and the one, let's see, next month is June and July. We have 2 live coaching sessions. I'll hand over to you, Rama, to round up on today's session.
Thanks, Cindy. I would love to hear any final thoughts that you have, the discussion that we have had.
So interestingly, Rama, I think final thoughts is, this, and it's coming up for me now, right? It is about being who you are. And I didn't come into this panel with that thought in my mind, but I'm going out with that thought. And it just came to me in this conversation here. And being able to be comfortable with who you are.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I think Mahesh mentioned that about the reflection part, and I can see that opening up. Ram, do you have anything that you want to close today's conversation?
I just want to thank you for making it possible. It's been delightful to have this conversation with all of you. It never really seemed like it's a panel that's just been convened. It somehow feels like we've kind of known each other for many years now. For some reason, that's the level of comfort that I have got from this. So thank you for making it possible. Loved it.
That's actually something which Cindy mentioned and you mentioned as well, and I felt the same. I mean, and it wasn't, it was just friends talking with each other, and I'm including all the attendees as friends as well, because they're so involved and engaged, and what wonderful questions have come through in that, which has actually made me reflect and think on how the being of the person, as Ramesh was saying and Mahesh was saying, how do I start reflecting, and how do I grow as a person, and how much that intra with another person or interpersonal skills, how will that, and the vulnerability which showed up so beautifully, the examples that were thrown up.
And I was also vulnerable to the fact that I'm probably not the only non-certified person on the panel for today.
And we didn't notice. We didn't notice.
Absolutely.
You are 2 times.
Yeah, it came very naturally to you. Yeah.
But I'm getting there. I promise you.
Absolutely. I can hear that. Yeah. No, and clearly, I mean, those coaching competencies are, so every time I look at it, I'm amazed at the thought that's gone behind it. On being how, when you break that down as to how that's what leadership is about, that's what being authentic is about. And that's how you create trust in an organization. That's how you build teams. And those are the teams what are going to build the organization.
Yeah.
So before, I see a lot of questions on what to do with the password, Cindy. So I think people have to go to the back of the website and put it in for the CCU, right?
Yes, absolutely. They go to the back office and put it in for CCUs. Yeah. Okay. So it was lovely being all of you with all of you. Panelists, you're amazing. Thank you.
Thank you.
Lovely being with you. Rama, wonderful work there. Thank you.
Everybody, yeah. Thank you. Thanks, Cindy. Thanks.
Thanks, everyone. Thanks, Rama.
Bye,
Great,
everyone.
great
Everyone on
conversation.
YouTube. Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thanks, guys. Thanks, everybody. Bye.